organisers of the MEISA network. So I'm going to introduce the speakers and try to just first of all, just of course, before I say anything else, in the event of an earthquake, please drop and hold and cover. In the event of a fire, the exits are here, and the exit is out that to the left, and the assembly point is the car park. The toilets are around to the right on the same floor. Just want to note also that we've got a videographer taking live footage of tonight's event. So if for any reason anyone doesn't want to be recorded or shown in any publication, just please let me know, and we can make sure that, or let Luke know, who is the videographer over here. Also, just a small announcement, our mana whenua representative here at the University of Otago Wellington campus is unfortunately are not well today, so he wasn't able to join us. So he passes his apologies, toa waka, and he has asked me to pass on his blessings to this event, and also to welcome all of our guests to this place here in the University of Otago Wellington campus. So I want to just start by thanking all of the people who have made this launch event possible. I want to thank the organising committee of MEISA, Dr. Nadine Kreitmeyer, Dr. H.R. Killich, Dr. Hanley Boyson, Bill Harris, Professor Bill Harris as well, for his inspiration and mentorship. I want to thank the sponsors who have made this event here in Wellington possible as well. UNESCO, the New Zealand National Commission for UNESCO, and the politics program of the Otago University as well. We're going to try to proceed as quickly as we can this evening, understanding that it is Ramadan, the holy month of Ramadan, so we've provided some small offerings for breaking the fast at 5:26 this evening. And then we're going to have something to eat from around 6 o'clock once we've finished our formalities. So we have 3 speakers tonight. We're very fortunate to have 3 very, in different ways, prominent and knowledgeable speakers. We have Mr. Ibrahim Omar from the New Zealand Labour Party, list MP in the government, who's going to speak to us. And then Emeritus Professor William Harris, who's been promoting Middle Eastern studies in New Zealand for as long as I can remember. And he's been an inspiration to many of us as well. And then we're going to have Mr. Tony Lynch, who's the official responsible for the reporting, responding to the Royal Commission report on the Christchurch tragedy terrorist attack in 2019. So that's the agenda, and then we can go outside and hope you'll all join us for some nice conversation and something to eat from around 6 p.m. I also want to welcome all of those that are joining us online tonight. It's fantastic that you're joining us. This is something we're quite used to now, isn't it? Getting together in the digital world. So welcome. We have around approximately more than 100 students from Victoria and Otago who are all studying Middle East politics now. So this is the next generation of scholars and observers and interlocutors with the Middle East and the Islamic world. So we're very grateful to have them joining us, and all the other guests who are joining us online as well. Thank you and welcome. So without any further ado, I want to pass over to Dr. Nadine Kreitmeyer, who's going to tell you what is MEISA. Thank you, Nadine.
No, okay. The seeds for this network date back quite some time, but the current form now started just before the lockdown last year, that we got together and thought it's time to start and make an effort to establish such a network. And I think international events, be it refugees coming to New Zealand, be it the Christchurch attacks that happened, all demonstrate that it's very important to look at what's going on, not only in the Middle East and North Africa, but also in other countries where you have Muslim minorities or majorities, as well as here in New Zealand. And I think New Zealand has a very unique position here, that we have communities from so many different cultural backgrounds, from so many different countries, social, political, economic contexts. And we try to somehow make that visible also in the name of this network. And I think the first meetings we had were all about how do we call us? How do we make it possible to include all those diverse perspectives, regions, and communities? So that's how we came up with this name, to make sure we cover the core Middle Eastern countries, look at authoritarianism in those countries as economic development, at religious minorities there, be it Christian or other sects, and to link those to our perspective here. So in the past year, we have organized a couple of events to, first of all, see who is out there in New Zealand. And we were very positively surprised that we thought we are a small community of a few people, but actually we very quickly, for our first big meeting, already had 30 members who were very interested in joining, both senior scholars, but also MA students, PhD students, who felt that they have now a platform that they can on which they can connect to other students, but also that can reach out to civil society, to think tanks, and provide maybe an entry point at some point for their careers in different jobs. So some examples of the meetings we had last year were a talk on the constitutional transformation of Turkey, which is a very important development, I think. Everyone has heard of what's going on in Turkey in the past years. But we also had other topics, be it the tribal state relations in Yemen and the current situation in Yemen, or civil-military relations in Pakistan, but also the development of a Muslim identity here in New Zealand. So we always try to build up this bridge to topics that are relevant in this context and the perspective of New Zealand scholars. If we look now at our members, then we can see that all universities in New Zealand are somehow represented in this network. So Otago was kind enough to host us, but all our members represent different universities. In terms of future plans, we want to engage, obviously, in more academic events, but this launch also functions as an occasion to reach out to other actors and organizations out there, be it civil society, be it government representatives, policy circles, etc. So I hope we can have a fruitful discussion and presentations tonight, and take further steps from here. Thank you very much.
Right, so I welcome to the lector, Ibrahim. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I'm just make sure.
Kia ora koutou, assalamu alaikum. There is a say, There is a say in Arabic, النسيان هو وباء المعرفة. That is, forgetting is a plague of knowledge. In the contemporary times we live in, where the synonym of Islam in the Middle East is a terrorism, we have allowed ourselves to forget the history of the large and the most important region. We have forgotten that Islam and the Middle East dates back to the dawn of civilization and has produced scholars, scientists, storytellers, activists, historians, the list goes on, who shifted the nature of our world today. We know where this gap of knowledge in this region has directed us. The plague of Islamophobia as a result of coursed through the veins of academic institutions, the foreign policy of international governments and non-state factors. I stand here today as a member of parliament to share my reflections on the importance of this launch tonight. The inauguration of the Middle East and Islamic Studies at Aotearoa, known as MEISA network, marks a commitment to understanding, engaging and producing critical thoughts into this region, which is long overdue to Aotearoa or for Aotearoa. Due to the small size and the geographical isolation of New Zealand, we have held an incredibly fortunate position in the international realm. We know this because international dilemmas often fall at doorsteps of our neighbors or our friends, while we benefited with the time to observe, to plan, and the option to act when required. However, as the world is growing and becoming increasingly interconnected, the physical distance we hold is no longer an advantage we perceive it to be. With the globalization driving the connecting force of transport, movement of people, internet, and the influx of information and ideologies, we are closing the distance. And we are not exempt from the global issues and threats that we have been watching or happening overseas, which we unfortunately have been highlighted through the pandemic and the Christchurch massacre. I remember moving to New Zealand as a Muslim and a refugee. My main priority and ambition was to study. Education was a golden ticket for me and the way out of my 80 hours a week work. When I started my first paper of international relations and politics, I was interested in studying about the Middle East and the Islamic world. As someone who migrated from Northeast Africa, I was very close, which is very close to Middle East, not just geographically, but also culturally and linguistically. I wanted to learn more about the region that heavily impacted my country and also myself, who made me who I am today. The fact that I am a Muslim and that I speak Arabic are not mere coincidence. If we look back to the expansion of the Ottoman Empire in 1557 to the now known Eritrea and Ethiopia, or the Habesha, which encompassed Eritrea at the time as well, we begin to the transmission of culture, religion, and the language. The historical pathway of linking these two regions unraveled the fabric of the culture that I participate in today. To give you an idea, the 50% of the Eritrean population adheres to Islam, and about the same percentage also speaks Arabic, while Arabic is one of the national languages of Eritrea. So when I started my first lecture and the topic of Islam was discussed at some point, I was surprised about how little my fellow students knew about the Islam in the Middle East. They were quick to link it with the flow of refugees. At the time, there was a biggest refugee crisis and also terrorism, somehow also misogyny. That's also because of the misrepresentation of the region in the media of misrepresentation of the regime and Islam in the media and also the mainstream politics. We have seen in the last 4 or 5 years how the ban from Muslim countries and calling the countries and regions names had basically fueled the hatred and also the prejudice against Muslims and also Middle East, to be specific. It was always a surprise when I interjected about how much Islam and the Middle East contributed to the human civilization. And a lot of people seem to be surprised always, because Islam is always that primitive religion, and the Middle East is that a place where people basically known as savages come from. And as a politician now, I'm still also surprised how my fellow politicians and other decision makers know about Islam and the Middle East. That means we have a long way to go. Islam and the Middle East have been a global focus in the last few years because of massive oil reserve that's been booming for the last 5 decades. Successive Gulf Wars started in 1990, the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, extremism and terrorism, specifically since September the 11th. The Arab Spring somehow also gave the region a focus. The ongoing Syrian and the Yemeni conflicts, of course, the longest conflict in the region, which is Israeli and the Palestinian conflict, means the focal will remain. More or less what happens on both Islamic world and the Middle East affects New Zealand. In 1973, the oil crisis could be a good example how New Zealand economy was affected. New Zealand has sent its troops to serve in Afghanistan, Iraq, and the Sinai as a part of peacekeeping missions between Israel and Egypt at the time in the early 80s. The Muslim community here in New Zealand is also vibrant and is growing. The Muslim community members also they maintained a strong relationship with the country of origins. We can talk about trade. The halal trade itself was about 3.5 billion, and it's growing every day. The trade exchange is also on the rise. Expo 2020 is an opportunity for New Zealand to showcase its values, innovation, and the creativity, but most importantly, to connect itself to the Islamic and the Middle Eastern world. It is the world's largest gathering of commerce, culture, and industry. It will be an opportunity for businesses to connect with the global audience. It is important that our future generation have access to an institution and network such as this Middle East and Islamic Studies Aotearoa network. It is because it's a region is strategically located. It's also natural land bridge connecting the continents of Asia, Africa, and Europe. In recent times, its innermost deposits of oil have made the Middle East more important than ever. It brought both negative and positive attention to the region. It was also the site of some of the world's earliest civilizations and the birthplace of 3 largest religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. It is the fact that cannot be ignored. As long as it is a long overdue, and incredibly relevant for our academic institutions to invest in Islam and the Middle East, especially after what happened in March 15. Through the great leadership of our Prime Minister and our nation's response to the tragedies, we have earned a strong spotlight in international arena today. I cannot think of a better time to launch the MESA. And finally, I just wanted to congratulate the organizers and the hard work that you have put into this. I know that it might be the smallest step, it might seem a small step today, but this will have a positive impact in the future. When I was a student, I actively looked around to find anything that that linked me back to the region, anything to study, but that was nothing at all. So I just want to congratulate you for taking this step, because I know this is a very important to all of us, to New Zealand, which is actively opening up to the Islamic world and also the Middle East. At the moment, we've got about 9 ambassadors from Muslim and the Middle Eastern countries serving in Wellington, and who are actively looking for opportunities to link New Zealand to their countries of respect. I wish some of them would have been invited tonight. It would have been good, because they are just looking for any opportunity to really to link their countries to New Zealand. So lastly, I just wanted to reiterate my congratulations to you, and I'm more than happy to be involved as we go forward in this very, very important project. No reira tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Okay, shukran jazilan for those very insightful and salient points. Thank you very much, Mr. Ibrahim Omar. So it's my great pleasure to next. I just want to note also that the hour of iftar has passed, so if anyone wants to. Yeah. So let's move on to our next speaker, Professor Emeritus William Harris. Welcome. Thanks. Yes, let me.
Well, I want to start off by following on from Ibrahim and congratulating and thanking Leon and all the rest of you who've been involved in this initiative. Leon in particular has been really busy with house renovation and the creation of new courses, and that he's been able to create such an enthusiastic core for this new venture is really fantastic. Thank you, Leon. And again, thank you to everybody else who's been involved in this, and especially our academic colleagues from up and down the country. We hope we can add civil society people to them. And those from the official and parliamentary arena who join with us in holding these interactions of us all can be extremely fruitful in this mixing of perspectives from different origin points. So this is a great initiative. I was asked to say something in this little talk, about the intersection of New Zealand with Middle East studies, which gave me all sorts of possibilities to head off on. What I'm going to do is to touch on some aspects of the importance of the Middle East to this country. And I think there are several aspects involved here. There are tangibles, such as the commercial and security dimensions. There are intangibles, the fact that our sense of being as a national entity to some extent derives from what happened in Gallipoli, and our other involvements in the world wars in the Middle East. That's an intangible. And then another aspect of the importance of the region to us is the flow over from what we do in the region, how we approach the region, to our other global partnerships and relationships. Obviously, here one's thinking to some degree of the United States. And then I just wanted to go on and make a few comments about increasing tightening and difficulties in terms of doing research on the Middle East. The significance of the region. There is a mild tendency from time to time to downplay the economic and strategic significance of the Middle East as a great and vulnerable hub of world commerce. And this, I think, to some extent reflects the United States' idea of pivoting away from the Middle East to Asia Pacific. But along came, for example, the big ship ever given, the big container ship ever given, which demonstrated to us how easily there can be a global supply chain interruption in the Middle East, which quickly causes billions of dollars in costs. And this is just one ship stuck in the Suez Canal by accident. This highlights our own commercial interests in the Persian Gulf, for example. The Persian Gulf states have become vigorous consumers of food, technology, services, armaments, turbine repairs, for example. And we are deeply concerned with the security of connection of the Persian Gulf with the wider world because of our own interests, our own commercial interests. We are concerned with the security of local wealth, the security of thousands of New Zealand expatriates in several of these countries, the geopolitical stability of the regimes that we ourselves have become to a degree entangled with, the human rights behavior of those regimes, and most recently, of course, the differential impact across the region of the pandemic, of the global pandemic. So that's one collection of commercial and security affairs that sit heavily with our association with that part of the world. Then one of the relatively new things, I mean, the involvement of the clashing of regional powers in the Middle East and the involvement of great powers is nothing new, of course, but we've reached in our own days, these days, a particular level of intensity with affairs like the Syrian war, the Yemeni war, the Libyan war, the involvement of a whole range of external actors in those affairs. Both the regional and great powers involved in the Middle East manipulate arrays of local clients and proxies, and they also threaten from time to collide directly. We've even had almost a collision between Turkey and Russia over the state of affairs in northwest Syria. About a year or so ago, if you remember, the Turks were heavily pressed by Russian encouragement of the Syrian regime to push further into that area. And Turkey responded very vigorously to that, so that's one example. Then we have Israel and Iran, the conflict between Israel and Iran in the Syrian arena. We have to be interested in these things because these things can flow on if there are confrontations between and among regional powers and great powers, added to terrorist affairs, I suppose you might say, Islamic State and that sort of thing. I think the point needs to be made that a collision of regional powers, if it does take place on a higher level than what we've seen in Syria recently, and it could, would make the affairs of Islamic State and so forth rather small firecrackers by comparison. So expertise on and studies of all these fissures are plainly within New Zealand's national interests because they affect our affairs across that region, and our affairs are not small. New Zealand also in the intangible area has had an intermittent impetus to do mediation on the Scandinavian style, and this is a very good thing. It arises out of our view of the United Nations as a platform and last resort for smaller members of the international community. And we feel it's worthwhile to offer ourselves from time to time in the possible seat of mediator. We're not the only ones, of course, and the Norwegians and Swedes have a much bigger institutional apparatus to support it than we do. So that's just a few comments on the significance of the region for us. I haven't gone into our own formation of national identity and that sort of thing that also arises out of our involvement to some degree, out of our involvement in that part of the world particularly. I just leave that as a note hanging in midair just at the moment. Now, what I wanted to do in the second half, and I hope I'm not overplaying my time here, is just to make a few comments about the increasing tightening of possibilities for doing work in the Middle East these days. There's always been distance and cost for New Zealand academics and other New Zealanders who want to get involved in the affairs of the region and comment on them. There are those big factors, and those factors of distance and cost means, and I know from myself the effect of this, that one goes to the Middle East, one has a list of things to do, one really wants to rush into them as fast as possible, because you know your costs are such that things are going to run out for you not too far down the track. I lived in Lebanon for a large part of the 1980s and felt this there. There are some other things I just want to mention, though, that make things perhaps more difficult as time goes by for doing Middle East studies, and that makes our association across the country, across different spheres in the country, academic, civil society, official, parliamentary, makes our cooperation very, very important, the limited resources and the costs of involvement in that part of the world and in the academic and writing areas. Firstly, there's been a contraction of the traditional media of record in the Arab world and in Turkey particularly. Newspapers of considerable repute, like Al Hayat in the Arab world, As-Safir, a leftist newspaper in Lebanon, Radikal, a leftist newspaper in Turkey. These are all publications that are no longer with us because of the pressures they've been under in the political arena, with journalists being carted off to jails and publications wrecked by sudden finding of tax revenues that they ought to produce from regimes and so forth. The journalists have migrated in different directions, apart from prison. And they've migrated into worthwhile new projects like Al Monitor. But these new publications are more peripheral on the internet, and they're more distant from the sources of information. Then there's more effective surveillance and restriction by the regional and great powers that have such a stake in Syria, for example, these days. Regional powers have a command of the arena now that they didn't have in 2015, 2016. This is from about 2017 onwards, as Turkey, for example, has reinforced its role as the gatekeeper of access into northern Syria. And that's to some degree a restrictive development. The regional powers don't particularly want Western academics wandering around and digging into their affairs. And then, of course, on top of anything else, there's the pandemic. The pandemic has come along to freeze us all together on top of the difficulties of access, the new difficulties with contracting media outlets as documentary sources, and the interests of regional powers. Just to finish these comments, I'd like to make a plug in favour of the teaching of Arabic in New Zealand. Arabic is the only one of the 6 official languages of the United Nations that is not taught in any tertiary education, as far as I know, institution in this country. It is a language spoken by between 400 and 500 million people. In terms of justification, if you did a calculation where you weighed up how the money that people make out of the Middle East, that private and state sources make out of the Middle East in this country, and the cost of having one small center or something with a couple with 2 or 3 staff members to provide a seat for Arabic as one of the 6 official languages of the United Nations. The cost differential is huge. I mean, the revenues that people derive from the Middle East in one way or another, and the cost of setting up something for the study of Arabic. And it's not just Arabic. The three languages of the non-Arab states, obviously Farsi, Turkish, and Hebrew, are spoken altogether by something not far short of 200 million people, to add to the 450-odd million people who speak Arabic. So I just take my chance here to press that one just a little bit. So to sum up, we have security interests in the Middle East, we have economic interests that are affected by security problems, we have human rights interests, and we have the interests that arise from our own history of interaction from Gallipoli onwards in the Middle East. Each of these arenas flows into the others. And good knowledge and a decent expertise base, which this initiative is designed to further, help us to secure a whole array of interests that we have in that part of the world. So thank you very much for tolerating my meanderings.
Thank you, Bill. Not meanderings at all. I mean, it's incredibly concise and very to the point. Thank you very much. And one of the shortest talks we've heard, so thank you. Mr. Tony Lynch, welcome. Thank you very much.
Ena mana ena reo e ro rangatira ma tēnā koutou katoa. Assalamu alaikum. My thanks to Leon Goldsmith for this opportunity to speak to you today. And as an Otago alumnus, I'm of course shamelessly biased to anything that involves the university. But I'd like to join others in expressing my congratulations for the launch of the MEISA network today, and to all those involved across New Zealand universities. It's a wonderful initiative and very much of its time. I'd like to acknowledge my 2 previous speakers tonight, Professor William Harris just before me, and of course Ibrahim Omar, MP, a very local MP, who's been a very significant part of the government's response to the report of the Royal Commission of Inquiry into the terrorist attack on the Christchurch mosques. And that is the subject of my keynote this evening. So I'll spend a little bit of time outlining the findings and recommendations of the Royal Commission, the government's response to the report, and the work now underway. But I'd also like to talk a little about the outreach and engagement the government has conducted over the last few months with the Muslim community, with other pan-faith and pan-ethnic communities, and the feedback and insights from that engagement. Ibrahim participated in all the hui across the country, as did local MPs from both sides of the House. So great to have you with us tonight. And given this audience too, I would also like to touch on the role of academia and the institutions in this work. First, I would like to acknowledge the 51 shuhada, those who were lost on that terrible day on March 15, 2019, and the affected whānau, witnesses and survivors, as well as the Muslim community, and all impacted by that terrorist attack. These attacks were unprecedented for New Zealand and remain very significant on a global scale. It had a horrific traumatic impact on the community in Christchurch and on wider New Zealand. Though more recently I've also had the honour of engaging with that Christchurch community, and what an extraordinary community they are, with some remarkable courage and strength. The government responded quickly after the attacks in a number of ways: arms measures, the Christchurch call. And to ensure a comprehensive, informed response, the government set up a Royal Commission of Inquiry, which is the most significant form of inquiry available to any government. Its primary task was to inquire into whether public agencies could or should have prevented the attacks, and what could or should have been done for the future to prevent a repeat. The report was presented to the Governor-General on 26 November last year, and shortly thereafter, on 8 December, the government released the report in full to the public, so it was tabled in the House, and with some initial responses. The government accepted the findings in full and agreed to all 44 recommendations in principle. In terms of the findings, the Royal Commission found that there was no failure of public agencies in respect of preventing the attack, but also that there was an inappropriate concentration of resources on Islamic terrorism, though this did not result in the terrorists not being detected, and failings in the firearms licensing system. And more broadly, the Royal Commission found failures in our national security system and significant deficiencies in our social cohesion. And on social cohesion, though we pride ourselves as New Zealanders in being a welcoming people, in fact, what came through was this was not the experience for many. The 44 recommendations covered 4 broad areas: to improve New Zealand's counter-terrorism effort, to improve the firearms licensing system, to support the ongoing recovery needs of affected whānau survivors and witnesses, primarily the Christchurch Muslim community, and to improve social cohesion and New Zealand's response to our increasingly diverse population. In accepting all 44 recommendations in principle, the government was also clear that its response would not be bound simply by the parameters set by those 44 recommendations, that it would take a holistic approach rather than considering each recommendation in isolation. The government also determined a vision and a set of principles to guide its response. In terms of the vision, it is for a diverse, inclusive and safe New Zealand. And in terms of the principles, that the treaty and its principles would guide our response, that victims and whānau are at the centre of the response, so a community-centric focus. That we will strive for safer communities in a New Zealand that is more inclusive with equal protections for all. We will be accountable and forward-looking. We will be proactive in reaching out to communities, and we will take practical actions that make a difference to people's lives. On 8 December, the government announced a number of initial measures in its response. These included a range of social cohesion initiatives, such as the Safer Communities Fund, the announcement of a number of legislative changes, such as to the Terrorist Suppression Act. On counter-terrorism, the creation of an early intervention program to help prevent radicalisation. Some machinery of government changes, including the lifting of the Office of Ethnic Communities to a Ministry of Ethnic Communities. The Navigators and a Collective Impact Board, which are to support the affected community. And naming Andrew Little as Lead Coordination Minister, and with the Prime Minister remaining very closely engaged across all this work, supported by Minister Priyanka Radhakrishnan. After the public release, the 2 ministers embarked on a program of nationwide hui, right across the country, more than 33 engagements from Invercargill through to Auckland, starting initially and appropriately in Christchurch from December, and then across the country over January and February. And it was very much a learning process as we went, and as Ibrahim will be able to attest. This was the first time that government, so ministers and a wide range of agencies, MPs from across the country, had engaged in this way with the Muslim community and with other faith-based and ethnic communities. Each hui had its own dynamics, energy, individual stories, sometimes quite remarkable stories, quite often quite heart-wrenching stories, always very moving. But across the hui, so each had its individual character, but across the hui, some very clear themes emerged. These have been summarised and they've been placed on the website in a very deliberate wish to ensure transparency. So some of these themes include an ongoing concern about government accountability, a focus on hate speech and hate crimes, the need for cultural competency across the public service, and notably in the education sector, which proved a consistent and very strong theme. A focus on social cohesion and the need to redress, for example, discrimination in employment. Concern at the portrayal of Islam, the Muslim community, and ethnic communities in the media, including in social media. The need to support ongoing community engagement with government, and the ongoing needs on the part of the affected community in Christchurch. And also, throughout these engagements, a very strong message from our Muslim community itself that they did not want the government's response and this process to be just about them, not to continue any sense of other, that this must be about communities right across the country and about our society writ large. And most other communities echoed the concerns raised by the Muslim community. And as further attestation, the Royal Commission itself produced a paper on what we heard from affected whānau survivors and witnesses, and the themes that we heard over the course of the hui were very consistent with this paper. Some of these themes are not in fact picked up by the Royal Commission, and not least reflecting that they had to operate under quite specific terms of reference. But you'll recall my comments earlier that the government's response is not bound just by the 44 recommendations. So two areas that were picked up were not picked up by the Royal Commission recommendations, but which are very much a subject of focus at present, are those around the education sector and cultural competency, and also questions around the portrayal of Islam and the Muslim community by media. So we have work underway or in train in all these areas across all 44 recommendations. And for example, the Ministry of Justice is just about to conduct public consultations around hate speech and hate crime. And the Office of Ethnic Communities is similarly consulting on the new ministry. We're also continuing our outreach and engagement more broadly with a focus on Māori, Pacifica, and rainbow and disability communities. Some areas have or will see early results, but for many, what we're talking about is generational change, societal change. So some very large projects that will take time. I mentioned in opening that I would also touch on some issues of relevance to academia. And one area highlighted by the Royal Commission was the need to lift the national discourse on national security, to engage the public on issues such as counter-terrorism and countering violent extremism. A reflection taken from New Zealand's own counter-terrorism strategy that the best defence against terrorism is to have a resilient, inclusive society. And one of the initiatives announced on 8 December is for a National Centre of Excellence on counter-terrorism, countering violent extremism and promoting social cohesion. To lift the academic focus in these areas, and this is set in Recommendation 14, with a concentration on independent New Zealand-specific research to help inform public discussion and guide the work of policy agencies across government. We've been engaging very closely with academic colleagues across the country on the National Centre, with real support for this initiative. And we will be holding a CT Hui in Christchurch on 15-16 June, and that reflects a specific recommendation, number 16, with the intent that this will be the launching pad for the National Centre of Excellence. So I'll just close with a couple of quick reflections. We have an incredible opportunity through the Royal Commission's report to impact New Zealand and our society. We have this extraordinary diversity in New Zealand. Our Muslim community, other communities, people of different faiths and ethnicities, all contributing to the richness of our society. But we're not doing nearly as well in welcoming and embracing this diversity as we might think, and that is very clear. Ignorance, not necessarily hate or prejudice, was often cited at the Huis as the cause. And so this is where our academic community and initiatives like MEISA come in, to redress ignorance, to build knowledge and understanding, to lift the public discourse, and so to help build the inclusive, resilient communities we want to see. So kia kaha, best wishes, and Ramadan Mubarak. Thank you very much. Tēnā koutou.
So thank you very much to all three of our speakers. I want to hold you up at all. It just made me think about just a quick story. When that terrible day, or the days after that terrible day, I sat with my students in Oman, the Sultanate of Oman, a group of young Arab Muslims, and we watched together live the speech that the Prime Minister made in Parliament in the days after that. And to a person, and Omanis are not given to spontaneity, really, they got up on their feet and they applauded our Prime Minister. So the government got off to a very good start in the way that it recovered and responded from that terrorist attack. But as all of our speakers have shown, it's what happens after that. It's how we actually do things tangibly after the event, in terms of, as Ibrahim Omar told us, understanding the contribution, the immense contributions of Islamic civilization, understanding the complex politics of the region, having the linguistic skills to be able to engage properly in the region, and also establishing the policy frameworks that can actually make it happen in education and all of those things. So thank you so much to everyone. So tomorrow MESA is having its first workshop. We've had a lot of meetings on Zoom, so we're going to enjoy getting together and having some real good discussions amongst the Middle East scholars here in New Zealand, here on the campus tomorrow. So we're really looking forward to that. But in the meantime, we really hope that you'll join us for something to eat and drink outside in the lobby here, just to the left. We have some prayer rooms available there as well. And we really thank everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you so much for being with us. And Ramadan Mubarak, and thank you very much. Shukran.